And welcome to What to Fix in Recruiting. Affectionately, it has become known as WTF in recruiting. Thank you for your patience. We had a couple technical difficulties, but we're all here. And I have the panelists backstage who are very excited to share some insights on whether you are data-driven or data-drowned. So I'm going to bring our panelists on and have them introduce ourselves. But before that, I want to see in the chat really quick, and we're going to talk about music. Last time, if you were here for the DEI session, I asked our panelists what songs are getting them through their WTF moments. So now I'm like compiling this playlist that I can share with all of you. So if you can drop in the chat what songs are getting you through when you're having your WTF moment, we can make that a big community playlist for us all. So let's go ahead and bring on our panelists, and I will have them introduce themselves to you, and then we'll talk about recruiting data. There we go. All right, so first up, guys, I'll have you introduce yourself to the group here. We'll start with Tania. Tania, welcome to WTF.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Brandice. I'm Tania Gidney. I have been at Talentful, a UK-based RPO, for almost 3 years. I've been in recruiting for about 5 years. Prior to that was in admissions and enrollment. And I'm so excited to be here. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'll turn it over to Matt.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning to everyone on the call. My name is Matt Couret. I'm the Director of Client Solutions for Hudson RPO. I've been with the company now just over, around 2.5 years, but I've been in recruitment. This is going to age me a little bit, since about 2008. So the people business, I've been around for a while now and seen the evolution of, some of the things we're going to talk about from a data perspective, and, the good, the bad, and, the ugly. But excited to be here today. Thank you so much, Brandice.
Thanks, Matt. Laura, hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Lockwood. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I am with Gusto. I've been with Gusto for about 1.5 years now as their head of talent operations and programs, and also in an interim role as their head of tech recruiting. Just been doing that for about 6 months, which has been some great experience. I have been in the recruiting and HR space for just over 10 years. All my experience has been in tech startups, so definitely used to the scrappy nature of building data and using data to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Now, I want everyone watching to know that when I reached out to Laura, Matt, and Tania, I was like, listen, we've all been to, these webinars and things about things that we think we're going to walk away with. All of these things are going to change our lives. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. But I have challenged the three of them, and they have so graciously agreed to push the boundaries a little bit, answer your questions, answer my questions also, and share how we can get a little bit more out of the recruiting data and industry benchmarking data that's available to us. So I just want to say ahead of time, just thank you for being here and taking on that challenge. So I'm going to open this up to the group really quick. If you were attending this session and you were watching somebody with your background, what would you want to walk away with? Laura, I'll start with you.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think there is an abundance of information that's out there. There are a lot of, first of all, places to find data and benchmarking. I also think that there are a number of data points that folks can pay attention to. And I think it's easy to get lost in the sauce, so to speak, and run into some analysis paralysis. And so just some of the tried and true places that I've gone to get information, and happy to share some of those as well as we go through the conversations. But also just, there's some metrics out there that may be outdated, or maybe we're using a little bit differently now in talent acquisition. And so just understanding and identifying what those key data points are, I would say would be a big takeaway and something we're going to chat through.
All right, Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I think the ground's always moving below our feet in the recruiting world, right? The world's always changing. So what meant something impactful last year versus what might mean something in 2 years can be a little bit different. So I think one, if I was attending this meeting and looking to gain some insight, it was, hey, what does it mean for something to be meaningful or impactful from a data perspective? Where might that data come from, or what is a reliable source of data from that perspective? And then maybe just a framework or a thought process around, how to leverage that data to provide the outcomes I'm looking for. Again, because the nature of recruiting, the nature of our business changes, as the world does, but, so do the outcomes that we're looking for. And hiring times in one period of time may not be the same as another period of time, depending on the nature of the business. So that's what I'd be looking to take away.
Great. It's a great answer, Matt. It was I'm kidding. I mean, it was, I'm not kidding. It's a great answer. Tania, over to you.
I would say one of the key things about recruiting is that it really demands strong stakeholder management. And so for me, data is one of the most important parts of that. Being able to understand data in a way that allows you to communicate with your peers, your senior leaders, to effectively solve problems, address candidate concerns, and build the best brand is so important. But similar to what Laura said, we can get a little bogged down in vanity metrics and metrics that don't actually have value. So how do you determine what is the point of data for your team? What is the value you're getting out of it? Things like that.
Awesome. All right, so we're just going to launch a quick poll because I want to get a feel for everyone that's here. So, Pranati, if you can throw up that poll, I just want to know kind of where people are. You'll see a little pop-up that says go to polls tab. If you all can just answer this really quick 3-question poll. This gives me an idea of, are you like, you've mastered data, like you're good, you're just here for the jokes, you don't know what to do with your data, or you have enough to be strategic, but you could be doing more. And it looks like things are skewing towards people have the data, but they could be leveraging it better, which is, so you're in the right place. For the folks who are on the other side, you're also everyone's in the right place. We'll try to address all of that, but also want to let you know that if you have questions as we're talking, drop them in the Q&A so that we can answer those in real time. That's just going to help keep the conversation relevant for all of you. All right, so now we're going to get into the questions. I know everyone that's attending read all of the bullet points that I wrote out and have memorized the session description, so you know exactly what we're going to discuss today. So I'm really proud of you for that. But just in case, I'm going to give you the answers anyway. So we're going to focus on first, how do you balance data and intuition? And I think this is a really interesting place to start because there's just so much out there, and all three of you have just spoken to this. So Laura, I'm going to start with you. Like in a world where data, we just have so much data, and which we didn't used to have, right? Recruiting data wasn't always like a thing, but now there's tons of it. But insights are scarce. So how do you differentiate between the metrics that are just interesting and those that are really essential for talent, for TA success? And any examples you have would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is one of those areas as well where we have to remind ourselves that we're working with human beings, right? And so anytime that we're sending out, and this goes for employee engagement surveys and things of that nature, that whenever we're using rating scales or different things, when we're surveying candidate experience or hiring manager experience with their recruiter, that oftentimes those scores are often not going to indicate what changes we need to be making, but maybe where the changes are. And we went through a recent exercise where at Gusto, we actually do send out candidate surveys. And we looked through our NPS data, and while our scores indicated that we had a relatively positive candidate experience, which again are on that sliding scale of kind of 0 to 10, how likely are you to rate your experience with us? Were the interviewers well prepared? I think what was interesting in that data when we looked at it is it's indicated we were doing great. And we maybe had a small pockets of information we needed to dig into a little bit more. But also I was hearing from a lot of our recruiters and our coordinators that we were having a high number of interview declines and a high number of cancellations at the last minute, and also just some gaps with interviewer preparedness. And so it was interesting to see that information and to not having it be reflected in the data that we were looking at. And this is where I become more of a fan of kind of comment fields, and also not just relying on sending out a link to a survey, which some people may or may not fill out is your recruiters also being in the weeds and talking to candidates. And what we found in the conversations recruiters had with candidates and what we found in the comments where people rated us highly is that there was feedback around people not showing up for interviews, around people that were not prepared, didn't have questions, or maybe also were repeating maybe a prior interview and were using questions that another interviewer was leveraging. And then also to that as well, a lot of our feedback indicated how lengthy and strenuous our interviewing process was in comparison to other organizations where they were actively interviewing. And I think that's oftentimes an area where a lot of organizations pride themselves to say, you know, look at the number of people that are interested in our jobs here and how many we actually hire. But to consider the impacts of your speed to hire and different metrics like that in your candidate experience, I think that it was very telling to see that candidates were feeling that. And also for us to be able to bring that back to see where candidates falling off and maybe rejecting offers because they're further along with other companies that are moving at a faster speed. So that to me is a really key example of where you need to have that intuition and also listen to the feedback of your team members that are in the weeds and talking to these individuals, be able to say there might be something else that's going on here.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I mean, looking at if your NPS is positive, but there's, you know, a bunch of stuff that's fallen through the cracks, like, is that to say, my takeaway from that is like it could be better, right? And we can use data to improve that. So, you know, if you're at a 9, you could be at a 15. I know that doesn't exist, but like, but that's how data can help you be better.
Right.
I'll throw it out to Matt and Tanya if you have any follow-up comments.
Yeah, no, I think Laura is spot on. I think, you know, from a data perspective, it can often be, you know, that guardrail, right, that influences, you know, how we perform in that category. I also think that sometimes the data can either be a floodlight or a laser pointer, right? In those cases of how we're trying to solve for a certain, you know, outcome that's happening. And a lot of the metrics we look at don't always, you know, highlight what the problem is, but they kind of force us to look at things a little bit differently that push us in that direction. And unfortunately, sometimes also have to have, you know, serious conversations with, you know, what our processes are that we might be married to, or what our beliefs are about our organizations.
Yeah. And being honest that like sometimes people don't want to lift the hood, right? If the scores look good, like if it ain't broke, like don't let me touch it. Tanya, you were gonna say something.
Well, I was gonna say, I think sometimes it can be really hard to be able to think about it from a systemic level versus a personal level, because if you're looking at your own personal data and you're identifying gaps, you can apply personal tactics to change your process. But then you're looking at a company-wide process, and that data gets skewed when you're dealing at a larger scale. And so it can actually create a harder problem of identifying the fact that there might be a systemic issue. There might be an issue with the process itself. So I think there always has to be regular check-ins with the data and regular documentation in your one-on-ones with your direct reports when they're seeing things. So the last couple of weeks, I for example, I've had more no-call, no-shows than I have in the last 3 years. And that's not going to get documented in a 2-week span but I documented it in my one-on-ones and with my team. So we have it when we do a retro. So being able to use those intuitive moments and make sure to document that in addition to the long-term data.
Yeah, I love that, Tanya. I think that really goes back to the idea of like inspecting what you expect and having the, you know, the ability and the position to be able to do that instead of just kind of like operating along and then getting to the end of some fixed time period and saying, oh my God, what happened?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if you all aren't picking up what the panel's saying, they're saying don't just go off of vibes. Like we have the data to support and to be able to tell a more cohesive story. So when someone asks you, well, why is this way? You know, you have your armor with what you need to answer those questions. So we had a quick question for you, Laura. How did you incentivize people to fill out the survey?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it's something that our recruiters talk about. We send it out 72 hours after the face-to-face. But I think, again, like this is where you can't always rely on surveys or data to provide that type of response rate from individuals. And so we also do ask our recruiters to have that touch point and debrief with the candidate afterwards. And there are notes that they'll store and share back with our teams so that we can identify that feedback and address it in real time with the interviewing loop. And then if we have other candidates that are currently going through the process and we're seeing these types of issues such as interviewer declines or no-shows, then we're able to make some quick changes to either pull people off of the panel and replace them with another person. So I would say that it's just over communicating the survey and explaining as well to people, how do we leverage that information? It's anonymous as well. I think some people are afraid to fill it out because they think that it's somehow going to be used against them during their interviewing process. So I would say just over communication and communicating the why behind the survey is important.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to move on because Richard, I think this is a good question. Do the surveys go out to all candidates or just the people that get hired? And then when in the process do you send those surveys?
Yep. So they go out to candidates that reach our face-to-face stage within 72 hours of completing their interview. So if they're on an interview panel or an interview loop, or maybe there's multiple interviews happening, it's from the latest date of that final interview on the loop.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next question. And Tania, I'm going to tee this up for you. So we have, and sorry, I actually asked this question, then we answered the first question, which is why I put the question we actually answered in the chat, if you're following me. So now we're going to answer the question that I originally asked. You guys pray for me. In a world where data is abundant, but insights are scarce, how do you differentiate between the metrics that are just interesting and those that are really essential for TA success? And can you give any examples of overvalued metrics that might be leading teams astray?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in actionable feedback. And not just in data, in everything. Is the feedback from my hiring managers actionable? Is the feedback from my manager to me actionable? Is the feedback I'm giving my direct reports actionable? So if my data is not helping me execute something, I have to question how valuable it is in the long scheme. It's great to look at sourcing data, for example, to get a sense of, what was your productivity over the last quarter, 6 months, year. But without additional knowledge of that specific role, the market that role sits in, the number of recs that recruiter has, how valuable is that sourcing? How valuable is it in actually planning and distributing resources within your TA team? Conversely, a metric I don't see get discussed enough that I love is time to ramp. How quickly are your recruiters getting a role that they've never worked before, getting it launched live, meeting with the hiring manager for a kickoff, calibrating quickly, and getting good profiles in through the stages? That I feel like is something that has very clear actions attached to it.
Yeah. Matt, what do you think?
Oh, well, I think Tania did a really great job there in laying that out. I want to echo some of her points there about the specificity of industry time, as it relates to time frame, as it relates to, benchmarks across that space, right? And we know, in the TA space, leaders move, TA leaders on average are moving every 2.5 years, right? So they might walk into an organization where, how much do I trust the benchmarking or previous information that's there? Do I have to go through a period where I kind of have to put my own hands on it and kind of, really understand if that's real or not real? I think a really good, what I believe in a lot of the customers that we work with today is important, outside of our, usual metrics, right, that you see, and some of them being vanity, some of them being not, is that when we talk about a decision-making framework and the time to make decisions, right, and that relates back to feedback, and really tracking that within those, those time to make decisions is important, because that's really where candidate experience will lag, right? Where that goes down the drain. We often find that confidence around being able to deliver that person across the goal line, and then, right, then the customer themselves or the individual company has a loss of, again, faith in being able to fill the role. And it comes back to that operational decision-making framework. And so providing them a sense of, oversight to say, hey, this is what our turnaround time looks like. This is what our feedback loop looks like. This is how long it's taking. And so the better that we can set that expectation on the front end and back it up with data that supports that, the better the outcomes then end up being for our clients and the candidates.
Yeah. Tania, you had a question. How do you track that kickoff data? Are you able to track that?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Talentful, we track from the moment we become aware that a role is coming into our lap. This is one of those companies track it differently, which can make it a little bit harder to track. But I think the moment I get told this is going to be a rec, that's day one. Then how quickly between day one do I get the kickoff with the hiring manager start? Then from there, how quickly is it live on the website? Or did we have to go through, if it's a backfill that's urgent, finance approval that wasn't initially given? All of that is time in between that we need to know. And then, of course, how quickly from the moment the role is live, are we getting people past recruiting screen to hiring manager screens successfully?
Got it. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so I actually like this question because it fits in the realm of of what WTF is all about. Is people would love to hear more about, what do you consider vanity data versus valuable data?
I think we're worried we're going to hurt people's feelings.
This is the place to do it, and then everyone will all get together. We'll make sure everyone's okay before we log off. But this is the place where we want to have some real conversations, and it might spark other questions that either validate or whatever the opposite of that is for what you're about to say. This is a safe space, Tania. Don't worry about it.
I actually have one that I've seen shared pretty consistently by senior leadership team. And it's interesting. It's one of those metrics that on the recruiting side, when we share in terms of our speed to hire and time to fill and whatnot, I feel like it's a metric I'm always asked for by senior leaders. And the way that it's shared and communicated, I feel like becomes a vanity metric and is a metric that I don't think is necessarily meaningful and maybe doesn't drive the right behaviors. And that is something that I've seen shared, is that people will ask, how many applications do we get? Like, how many people come into our top of funnel in relation to how many people we actually hire? And I think that what that message can create is kind of this elitist mentality of, look at how many people want to work here, which is great and true. And that's wonderful. We also need to remember we're in the age of bots and AI, where sometimes it's not always a human being that's applying on the other end of something. And we're not also considering, is this qualified talent that's actually applying to these roles? And so, in some of my prior experience, I've heard CEOs and all hands saying, like, we only hire 0.01% of talent based on all these applicants. And while that's interesting insight, right, and it tells us a bit about our funnel and what's happening at the beginning of the process, it doesn't necessarily, again, come down to like your quality of hire, your quality of talent. And you might also have a problem. If you're getting too many applicants, maybe your job description is way too general and you're not being specific enough. So I think that's a vanity metric that I often hear shared, and it can create this culture of people wanting to find the purple squirrels and unicorns and saying, look at how many people want to work here and look at how vast this pool is. So it's one of those things that without context, I think can create some wrong behaviors.
Laura,
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to just, echo on that too. We've worked across different customers who want to look at the data of applied versus sourced versus, however that, person comes into the fold. And I think sometimes that the way that data is looked at, right, does not take into account the work that has to be done from a TA perspective
Right.
to drive that person through the process. And it creates an unreliable, lens into, the quality of the candidate, the potential of what was done to get that person through the process. But furthermore, to something specific you said there, you mentioned, the number of applicants and, the availability of bots and ways to interact with companies now. And I promised Brandice that I wouldn't send this, webinar into some really far off place. But the reality is that technology is in a place today which allows, a lot more access for an individual or non-individual even to get their name in the hat of some opportunity. And that in and of itself creates a skewed metric when we look at the traditional way of measuring what our jobs look like, what, the health of those job descriptions and et cetera. So, coming into this pre-large language model, we might have been able to rely on it a lot more, but looking now, all recruitment organizations are challenged to look at these things a lot differently due to the availability of those resources to interact with the recruiting teams that are offering opportunities live in the marketplace.
Yeah, I don't think that's a too far off place to go, Matt. I think you're okay. Thank you for taking. I know that's not an easy question to answer, so thank you for taking that on. All right, so we've and then we're going to move on to something that I think is actually really interesting. We'll move on to our next topic, but I think this is worth mentioning. So, what metrics do you use to determine the quality of candidate that you're hiring instead of quantity? Can we give some specifics around that?
So I love this question because I actually don't find quality of candidate to be a great metric. Partially because there's no perfect way to calculate it, right? How are we defining quality? Are we defining it purely based on the fact that they were a yes from a hiring manager screen? But that doesn't address what the meat of that question is. Quality of hire is this person the right person? They're going to stay with the company. They're going to perform well. They're going to get promoted up. That's what that question's trying to get at. It's actually trying to ask, can you prove to me that this is the right person and we haven't wasted resources hiring the wrong person? And that is not something we can yet measure. And we will probably never be able to measure because, as Laura said at the beginning, we're in the business of humans and humans are unpredictable. So what I like instead is the idea of tracking the performance of the candidate in the cycle. How well did they perform relative to peers? What were their hard skills assessments, especially in technical roles? How did they assess compared to others? And then comparing that, if they are hired, to retention data. So it is something that's not great because you do have to look much longer, but that is going to be more valuable than getting at an imaginary metric.
Right. It's like we should be saying quality of recruit rather than quality of candidate, right? If we want to measure the performance of our TA function versus how well someone was onboarded and then trained and managed, to being a successful, quote unquote, quality person that was brought into the organization.
How well were they prepared for what the actual work scope, right, was? Like if you have TA telling people, oh, this is a really simple client-facing job, you're going to work 9 to 5, and then the candidate comes in and it's complex cross-functional management of an account working 9 to 10 every day, which ideally no one wants, but does happen in some sales functions. We want to make sure that the recruit is accurately represented and accurately prepared and onboarded.
Yeah.
And I would say, going back to that retention data and even just looking at attrition, I think there's always been this ongoing debate around, is attrition within the first 90 days a talent acquisition problem? Does that mean we somehow missed something in the interviewing process that we should have caught on to? Did we not sell the candidate hard enough and they kept interviewing, which we know most candidates are still continuing to interview once they've already started a new opportunity because they're winding down their search. And I think that that's important insight to look at is your attrition data and looking, within the first 6 months and some of those termination reasons, how much of it is voluntary versus involuntary. But to the point of what those reasons are, if it's role misalignment, was there something that wasn't communicated by the hiring leader within the interviewing process? Was the job description not necessarily capturing what the actual scope of the role was? Was there a skill set misalignment or a level misalignment? So I think those things are very important to bring back into the conversations, just as, especially when it's time to backfill that position, right? What exactly happened in this search? But also, I think there's an opportunity where people can look at it and say, it's a TA problem again. Like the recruiter we don't hire people in recruiting, right? We bring the talent and the business makes the decision. And so I think it's important for that to really be viewed as a partnership and to have those conversations, especially in those situations. But to the point, it is challenging to start to get to that quality of hire, but it can definitely help to influence future decisions when you are backfilling roles or seeing that attrition, especially in the first 6 months.
Yeah, and there's certainly, and Laura, with a lot of the companies that you've been a part of, over the time, right? Within the small startup category, there's a lot of pivoting that goes on. So,
yeah,
it's even more critical to have that open dialogue to really be able to echo what's changing in the business at the recruiter level and really keeping that open line, present.
Absolutely. Yeah, Laura, I think you've just given us at least one of the next topics for the next WTF session, which is that partnership and that collaboration, right? Like it doesn't all just fall on TA. There's a lot of things that need to happen, for other stakeholders and external business partners as well. And maybe we'll just invite them and we'll let you all relax, and then we'll fix them in a couple sessions, and then like everything will be fine and we won't have to worry about any of this anymore.
Perfect. Solve all the world's problems.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm here. So let's move on to data literacy. So this is actually a really interesting topic to me because we just Jem, we just published a case study with a customer who talked about reverse engineering recruiting data to meet hiring goals. And a big part of that was training their recruiters on the data that they have within their own pipelines and their own metrics to be able to course correct, to be able to catch it in real time, to be able to meet their own individual goals, and kind of how that bubbles up, instead of your manager catching all the data points and things that aren't happening, your pass-through rates, where things are falling out of the funnel, and then coming back to the recruiter and saying, like, we need to fix this. So I think data literacy is a really interesting topic. So I'm going to break this down into the what, how, wow. What, how, why, not necessarily in that order, so that we can talk about this a little bit. So let's start with the why. So Matt, why is it crucial for TA leaders to invest in building data literacy within their teams? I kind of just said it and kind of stole some of your thunder, but you have way smarter things to say than me. Why is it crucial, particularly in the areas of data collection and analysis?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, again, you talked a bit about it, but I think, listen, we're in 2024. We are exposed to more data more frequently than ever before, and to the heart of this discussion, right? What's noise and what's real? And we're inundated with so much of it that for TA leaders, it's going to be so imperative to have individuals on their team that understand how self-management's always been important, but now add the understanding of the data that they're looking at, and the ability, again, going back to what I say, inspect what you expect, the ability to understand what you're looking at and how to draw conclusions, right? I think recruiters have always worn a lot of hats. Well, you can add analysts to the mix, right? The ability to recognize what's happening around their business, what's important to their managers, what's important to their stakeholders, what's important to their candidates. Using the case study that Jem put out recently, that informs so much around what someone's individual contribution from an output perspective needs to look like as a benchmark. Data provides, again, it's a guide. It's not hard and fast for everyone, but it certainly points you in the right direction to say, hey, at a minimum, right, am I getting the desired outcome based on the desired output? And so that's a good, again, a good playbook to use to kind of push you in the right direction to achieve what you want. So for TA leaders that are on this call and outside of that, bringing people on that have the critical thinking capability to understand and differentiate, again, what's real, what's not real, and understanding what applications they're going to interact with that are going to show them that data is more critical now than ever, because that's just the world we live in.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and then we'll probably just kind of figure out a way to wrap all this into a nice, pretty bow for everyone. But Tania, what are some key data analysis skills that ICs should be trained in to effectively interpret and utilize data for to be more strategic?
Yeah, I mean, at minimum, I love reverse engineering. So I often use Google Sheets or Excel and look at departmentally what were my conversion rates at each stage? How many people did I have to source or applications they have to review to get to this, to ultimately get to an accepted offer? And to point out how valuable understanding your conversion rates are and being able to calculate it. In 2022, I had to do an urgent hire for a role that typically took us about 45 days and was able to complete it in 11 days from launching the JD to signed offer. And I was only able to do that because I had 6 months of data of working with that team, that I literally did the conversion at every stage. I pulled up my spreadsheet. I was like, okay, on average, I usually have to interview about 20 people because this team has very particular needs before they find someone that they like. I usually have to source about 180 profiles before I can find those 20 people because it's a very, very well represented market, but very limited representation in the specific nuances that they wanted. So understanding what is the market representation right now, LinkedIn Insights is great for that. Your own historical data in your ATS is great for that. Comparing it against your own rec history, what is the average amount of work you have to do? And then from there, reverse engineering. I would also say from an IC level, being able to ask yourself, is this a systemic issue or is this a me and my workflow issue? Is the data that I'm seeing where it's taking a really long time to get from source to offer, is this because I'm not targeting the right profile and I'm misaligned? Or is this because the hiring team has unrealistic expectations? Or is this because our comp offer is not aligned to what the market expectation is? Being able to look at your own conversion rates will really help you with that.
Love that. So, Laura, then how do organizations implement this on the job training? I mean, what can organizations do?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually something that we're deep in the weeds with right now at Gusto, and something I've been a part of at other organizations to help implement. But essentially, to get to a place where you have that data literacy, and I'm going to quote one of my sources here and one of my great partners at Gusto. Her name is Jennifer Oliver, our head of people analytics. But as we've been unpacking this topic, I think one of the things that you need to think of, or three of the things you need to think about, are awareness. So what data exists and what information is important to monitor and track. So this goes back to, what are those vanity metrics that may or may not be important, and really aligning with your recruiting leadership team on what are the key metrics that we want to track for recruiting, performance and goals for us to assess pipeline health. So awareness of what's available. The second piece is access. I think one of the challenges around data is that people feel like it's inaccessible. And so if there isn't access to that data and people don't have the awareness to where they can find the information, then it's just going to continue to live in your reporting module or your data warehouse or wherever you have it stored. So figuring out what data is accessible and readily available to empower individuals. The third piece, which I would say is really kind of the start of your journey to building data literacy, is trust in your data. So recently, we just over the last year have rolled out some dashboards that show recruiter SLAs and how long is it taking them to get back to candidates. And we had some feedback from recruiters that was essentially saying, hey, like, this doesn't seem right. I don't think this is my candidate. I made this offer, but it says I've only made 4 offers, but I know I made 5. And so this is where you have to get into your system and your process and really assess, are we doing the right things? Do we have standard operating procedures? Do we have good data hygiene? And there's probably going to be some cleanup required that I really highly recommend that you get your recruiters involved in, so that they understand that the fields that they are putting in your applicant tracking system or in your CRM, in GEM, how is that actually populating in this reporting, and how is that going to impact the information that we can share and communicate with hiring leaders? So I definitely think those are kind of the three big pieces. And so assessing that, building out your system and making sure that you have your system optimized and your process optimized. And then from there, it makes it easier to just, I would say, basic things, creating a list of how the reporting is accessible. We've done some Tableau dashboards generated by a data warehouse, so recruiters can really see and visualize this information. And also just teaching people how to pull reports from the system. We use Greenhouse as our applicant tracking system, but there's some report connectors that the team can build within Google Sheets that can just refresh data that shows which candidates are in what stages. So I would say some of those core elements are critical to getting started with building data literacy.
I would also, Laura, say making sure that your entire team is on the same page about what certain things mean. We had an issue where our team on a prior client was differently calculating offer to acceptance. So some people were calculating it from the moment verbal is given. Others were calculating it from the moment written was out. So you just need to make sure from day one that your documentation on your SLAs and your training and onboarding is very clear to your ICs. What does this mean for our organization?
Absolutely. I think definitely a key to your data. And I think I saw this question in the chat too, but people ask about speed to hire and how that's calculated. And some companies look at the date that, if you're looking at the candidate, the date the applicant enters the pool to the date the offer is accepted and signed. Other people look to the butts and seat date. What day did they actually join the organization? Two different metrics, right? Because one is going to be recruiting versus impact to the business, and how long did they go between the date that we closed the candidate and the date that they finally had that relief of the additional team member that they needed.
Okay. We have about 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna keep us moving. If you have more questions about anything you just heard, just drop it in the chat. I did see one that I want to call out before we move on, and I'll open this up to anyone on the panel. What are some common SLAs or KPIs that companies are using for TA teams to show that they're data-driven and looking to transform the recruiting experience?
We definitely look at time in stage within Gusto. We do have some SLAs around referrals, as we do have a really healthy referral program, and we want to make sure we're incentivizing people. And if they don't hear a response on someone they refer, they're not likely going to refer another person in the future, right? So closing the feedback loop with the individual that referred the person and reaching out to that referral is really key. It's hard to track. I've seen some companies try to do this, but communication, when did this email go out to this candidate? Really challenging. And that's why we've aligned ours to time that they're spending in stage, which again requires a little bit of trust in our recruiters to be communicating with candidates during those points. And that's also why communication has got to be logged in your system, so that as you're going back and trying to troubleshoot some of these sticky situations, you can see if we didn't respond to a candidate within 3 days, and kind of looking through some of that activity feed.
I think one of the key KPIs that we look at, for a lot of our customers and communicate again, is around that, interview to hire metric, right? And that speaks to a lot of either are we really in line with what the outcome that they're looking for, the type of hire? Do we have a good grip on the interview process, and does it meet the market standard? Is it pushing candidates out? And it stretches in a lot of different directions that affect the outcomes that are being looked at. And because we can monitor that in real time, and even over a short fixed period, we become very intelligent around what's happening and why is this, why are we continuing week after week to not get to the end result that we're looking for? So that's a really key one And I think our business leaders that we work with really appreciate that, because they are operating as, hiring managers is almost part of their job, not their full job. So it's not their entire focus. But when we can, what I like to say is sometimes spoon feed what's informative, it helps to really move things in the direction that they're looking to go.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to try to make this 5 minutes the most memorable 5 minutes of this entire conversation, which is hard because you all have been really, really, really insightful. And I know I appreciate it. I know the folks watching do as well. But this is not the Cheesecake Factory, so we can't have something for absolutely everyone. But I'm going to try to throw in one question that maybe this kind of like hits all the points if you haven't heard the thing that changed your life yet. So Laura, what data practices or interpretations have proven to be universally effective across various industries? And then conversely, can you point out a widely held data belief or practice that you think is misleading or no longer applicable?
Yeah, I would say, and I think we've touched on a few of these throughout this conversation, but I would definitely say your speed to hire metric and looking at the amount of time. And there's a couple of things, right? Like there's your time to fill. And Tania, I think you mentioned earlier in terms of how you all consider how long it takes to fill a role based on when you're first made aware of it. And we track a little bit differently. We look at the date the requisition was opened in our HCM, and then we have a separate field for our recruiting start date, because the business might open up a role and then say, we're going to fill that in 3 months. So we always like to track that and make sure that we have clean data around when did recruiting actually get the role in their hands so that they could have the kickoff, the job description, all those sorts of things, post the position. And then essentially that's when and where our clock starts. So I would say continuing to focus on your speed to hire and identifying how much time candidates are spending in stage is really critical. And then your pass-through rates that are happening within those stage can help you identify where you have panel misalignment. Maybe there's a recalibration that's needed. Sometimes even considering 3 strikes and you're out, or you reset. So if you've met with 3 candidates and they aren't moving forward in the process, probably time to take a step back and to recalibrate as a team. So I would say just that's, to me, the really key and critical focus of data is focusing in that space. I would say a widely held belief. I'm kind of a mixed bag on this one. This might be a controversial take. But one of the things that I think is interesting is the continued focus on source of hire. I think it can tell you a lot in terms of your talent brand and, where are your applicants coming in from. I do think sometimes there's a lot of weight put on referrals and sourced candidates being higher quality potentially than other talent within the organization, as we've talked about, quality of hire is difficult to assess. So I sometimes find that interview panels really want to know the source of where a candidate is coming from, and they'll sometimes weigh that into their decision of whether or not that's the right candidate. So we do get leaders that want to know how many people we've sourced, how many are coming through certain other sources and job boards. But sometimes I think that information can be misleading because people can form opinions if qualified talent comes from certain places or not.
Yeah. So to kind of just put a bow on this, and Matt, I know you're in the RPO world. Tania, I know you probably have some insights here too. So, we've talked about, what data matters, how do you balance, like I said, going off vibes versus what data is telling you? How do you improve the data literacy of your team? What are some industry agnostic data practices? But as you're deploying solutions across multiple organizations, how is technology continuing to impact how recruitment is performed, and how is it changing the organizational landscape?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but I mean, it's daily, right? So there are tons of different tools. We get pitched all the time. We work with analysts on best of breed technology, ensuring that, those are relevant to customers, but just taking a step back, again, it's ensuring that the tools that we bring to the job are the right tools to begin with, right? And that the teams all understand how to use them. One other comment I'll make just from a best practices example is just that we had a global enterprise customer that was, had recruiting and TA teams globally. And the one thing that we came away with right out of the gate through implementation is that there was not a common business practice amongst data entry around their recruiting data. Each of them was looking at it a bit through a different lens. And the problem is when you report that data upward, right, to the hands of decision makers, stakeholders, and otherwise, it's not something that can be trusted. So it's really, really important that there is consensus and alignment on what all those definitions are. To Laura's point, there's consensus on what each thing means. And even though there might be regional nuances, that decision-making framework that I alluded to earlier really has to be, again, aligned at that level where everybody understands things to be the same. We're all speaking the same, recruiting language, so to speak, in step with what the outcomes are.
Yeah. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you had questions, and we're going to launch a survey really quick because we want to know, is this valuable? Is it useful? Should I keep, Zoom dressing for you guys? And also like, what are the next topics you want to hear about? So Pranati is going to launch that survey right now. But if you had questions that didn't get answered, I'm going to put you through on the spot. Find these guys on LinkedIn. Ask them questions, connect with each other. We kind of want to make this more of a community-based model where we're all, sharing information with each other. So let's make sure we're doing that. And I want to say a huge thank you to Matt, Laura, and Tania. You guys were amazing. I really appreciate the conversation today. And I will be bugging you again soon because you're all really, really smart people and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
All right. If you can hit the leave stage button.